Welcome to Runnymede, the place where the world-famous Magna Carta was sealed more than 800 years ago, in 1215. Today an unassuming meadow beside the River Thames, Runnymede is one of the most important sites in British, and arguably world, history. And on this walk around the site, we'll not only inspect the many memorials which pay tribute to Magna Carta, but we'll also take a seat at the negotiating table and ponder the document's legacy. We'll then venture down to the river itself to answer exactly why this seemingly random countryside spot was chosen for such a significant event. And we'll even step foot into an entirely different country, as we venture into an acre of American land in the heart of the English countryside. All of that is to come over the next 20 minutes. But we begin our tour of Runnymede with the Magna Carta Memorial, erected back in 1957 to commemorate the document and its enduring significance. As we mentioned, Magna Carta was sealed more than 800 years ago in 1215, when the unpopular King John of England agreed to make a number of major concessions to a group of rebel barons, members of the English nobility. Fundamentally, the document sought to ensure that the king, the supreme ruler of the land, was not above the law, just like everyone else in his kingdom. This is a principle which endures to this day, more than 8 centuries later, and it's part of the reason why this memorial was erected by the American Bar Association, the leading association of lawyers in the United States. Magna Carta, with its ideals of the rule of law, was of great inspiration to American revolutionaries angered with the British government's laws and taxes during colonial times, and as such it provided great inspiration to their independence movement, the Bill of Rights, and the US Constitution. Today you'll find a lot of American input here at Runnymede. After all, as we mentioned, the sealing of Magna Carta here wasn't just an important event in the tale of British history, but also world history. Later on, we'll explore exactly how the medieval document has come to influence societies all over the globe. But we must begin the story of Magna Carta at the very beginning, when it was sealed on a crisp June day in 1215, likely just a few dozen feet from where we're standing now. The Bar Association's memorial doesn't mark the exact spot that the document was sealed. In fact, we can't actually pin down the precise location of the historic event. But we do know that it was somewhere here at Runnymede, an open water meadow bounded on one side by the River Thames and on the other by a hill, Cooper's Hill, the foot of which the Magna Carta Memorial stands at just here. As we can see, Cooper's Hill gently slopes down towards the wide open water meadow beside the river. And as simple as that may seem, the local geography played an important part in why this place was selected. With a hill on one side and a river on the other, Runnymede was naturally protected, and this meant that meetings between important figures, such as King John and the barons, could be held without fear of a surprise attack or ambush. Indeed, the sealing of Magna Carta was far from the first event to take place here at Runnymede. The meadow had in fact been used as a venue for outdoor council meetings for centuries beforehand. Now this wasn't unusual. Everybody from the Vikings to the Anglo-Saxons regularly held large assemblies outside, typically at a place which was easily reachable for people from many different parts of a kingdom. And that was Runnymede's other strength. It was easy to get to. Taking a look at a map of the area in the modern day, we can see that Runnymede is situated about 20 miles to the west of central London, crucially in between the towns of Windsor and Staines-upon-Thames, both around 3 miles away as the crow flies. Windsor's significance is well known. It was the site of Windsor Castle, the major royal stronghold which served as King John's base in the lead-up to Magna Carta. Meanwhile, Staines, on the other side of the Thames, was the site of an important river crossing, part of a major road built by the Romans, which linked London with the important town at Silchester, near modern-day Basingstoke. So, with natural defences, proximity to the King's base at Windsor, and easily reached for those on the other side of the Thames, Runnymede was sensibly chosen as the place where Magna Carta would be sealed. But what exactly was the document, and why was it created in the first place? Well, much of it has to do with King John's infamous reputation as one of England's worst and most unpopular monarchs. He's said to have ruled cruelly over the country, exacting violent revenge on his enemies, seizing property from free men, and most unpopular of all, levying heavy taxes on the people to fund unsuccessful wars abroad in France, where he was seeking to regain lands lost to the French. John lost his war with the French in 1214, and he was forced to pay heavy compensation to the victors, the straw which broke the camel's back for those who'd been paying taxes to support the war. In the east and north of England, an ever-growing group of barons, leading members of the nobility, began to organise a rebellion against their hated king. In May of 1215, they renounced their allegiance to John and marched on a number of major cities, famously capturing London. Fearful after the barons' capture of the capital, King John, now holed up in Windsor, agreed to peace talks with the rebels, to be held on neutral ground between his castle and the rebel base at Staines. And so they came to Runnymede, congregating in this open meadow, although the meeting likely wasn't quite as neat as suggested by this fetching monument in the grass. These 12 bronze chairs were placed in the middle of the meadow back in 2015, as part of an artwork known as the Jurors, marking Magna Carta's 800th anniversary. They were sculpted by Hugh Locke, and provide a striking visual metaphor for the document's enduring significance, inviting visitors to Runnymede to take a seat and ponder the legacy of Magna Carta, and its impact on law, government, human rights and freedom throughout history. Each of the 12 chairs is decorated on the front and back with images portraying everything from clauses of Magna Carta itself to depictions of Mahatma Gandhi's spinning wheel, Nelson Mandela's prison cell, the ancient Egyptian goddess of truth and justice, and many more. This all speaks to the role of justice, freedom, the rule of law, and human rights around the world in the modern day, principles which are fundamental to Magna Carta. Although, contrary to what many may think, the document sealed here at Runnymede was not the first to come up with these invaluable ideals. Many of the rights and principles enshrined in Magna Carta had been in existence for centuries beforehand around the world, from ancient Greece to China and more. But even in England it wasn't entirely novel. Just over a century before 1215, King Henry I issued the Charter of Liberties in the year 1100, which intended to hold the king and the rest of his kingdom to certain laws. The barons who despised King John suggested that he wasn't adhering to the Charter of Liberties, using this as part of their legal base for their rebellion. Initially, though, legal talks weren't enough to get King John to concede. 6 months of negotiation in the first half of 1215 got nowhere, and it was only upon the barons' capture of London that John was forced to agree to a document known as the Articles of the Barons. To confirm this, the two parties met here at Runnymede on the 15th of June in a formal peacemaking ceremony, in which King John affixed his Great Seal to this Great Charter, or in Latin, this Magna Carta. He didn't sign any document with a pen, so that's why we talk about the sealing of the Magna Carta, with a wax seal rather than its signing. In the end, though, it was an unprecedented event that enshrined the supremacy of the law over the king, and established many fundamental rights that persist in England and around the world to this day. But despite the great achievement of this great charter, in the short term, Magna Carta was actually an abject failure, because King John quickly reneged on the deal and plunged the country into civil war. We'll talk more about the immediate aftermath of Magna Carta later on, because now, as we've strayed off the meadow, we're about to do something extremely unusual. We're going to leave the United Kingdom and step straight into the United States of America. Well, sort of. Technically, this area, an acre in size and separated from the rest of Runnymede by fences, is very much part of the UK. but it's actually owned by the US government, having been gifted to them by Queen Elizabeth II back in the 1960s. What does that mean? Well, technically this acre can indeed be classed as US soil, but practically, walking through here isn't quite the same as strolling down Fifth Avenue in New York City, or along the mighty Appalachian Trail. We obviously didn't need our passport to get through that gate, and in practice this is still very much part of the UK. British laws would almost certainly apply if you decided to push the limits here for some reason. But the fact that the acre is owned by the USA means that they have the right to do basically whatever they like with it. And that's why it's within the American acre that you'll find plenty of references to the land across the pond. As we saw with the Bar Association Memorial nearby, the spirit of revolutionary America, as well as the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights which endure to this day, are inspired by concepts featured in Magna Carta. Just here, meanwhile, snaking its way up the slope of Cooper's Hill, is a staircase made of 50 cobbled stone steps, one to represent each of the USA's 50 states. Fittingly, given the diversity of America's 50 states, each of these 50 steps is slightly different from the other, each hand-cut from granite back in the 1960s, when this part of Runnymede was gifted to the USA in the wake of one of the most shocking events in the country's history. The US President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas on the 22nd of November 1963, and here in Britain the government decided on a gesture of goodwill in memory of the president. On December 10th, just a couple of weeks after the assassination, this acre was gifted to the USA, and in 1965 this memorial to JFK was installed in a ceremony attended by Queen Elizabeth II, Jackie Kennedy, and many more. It features an excerpt from Kennedy's inaugural address as president. "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend or oppose any foe, in order to assure the survival and success of liberty." With the protection of liberty a central part of his speech and presidency, the location of this memorial to JFK is no mystery. It's just a stone's throw away from the place where Magna Carta was sealed, the document having served as an inspiration to everything from the American Revolutionary Movement to the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The acre of land was gifted to the USA so that Kennedy's memorial would stand on US soil in perpetuity, and plenty of visitors come from across the pond to visit this important site today. Of course, we know from these memorials how much Magna Carta's legacy endures in America to this day. But what about back here in Britain? Does Magna Carta, once a keystone of the country's law, have any importance in the modern day? Well, back when it was sealed in 1215, the United Kingdom didn't exist. England, Scotland and Wales were separate nations with different rulers, yet parts of the Great Charter applied to all three nations. People from all over Britain came to Runnymede in 1215. It said that the King of Scotland and the rulers of Wales had allied themselves with the barons rebelling against John, and so their representatives came to air their grievances towards the English king. In previous years, John had taken members of the Scottish king's family hostage and illegally taken control of vast swathes of land in Wales. With this in mind, Magna Carta was a British document that applied not only in England, but also Wales, Scotland, and even Ireland, although no similar concessions were given to the Irish at the time. But more than 800 years later, while the spirit of Magna Carta and its commitment to the rule of law may endure, the document is legally not all that relevant in the modern day. The original Magna Carta contained 63 clauses, but just 3 remain part of British law today. One is to do with the rights of the Church of England, another relates to the individual powers of the City of London, and cities, towns and ports elsewhere in England, but the most important is that which ensures the rights of free men, that they have the right to justice and a fair trial, and can't be taken, imprisoned, outlawed, exiled, condemned, or anything else without due process. Today, the right to a fair trial remains a fundamental right for people all over the UK, but it wasn't quite as far-reaching as it sounds back in 1215. Magna Carta refers only to the rights of freemen, and back in the 13th century, only a small percentage of the population would have actually been considered freemen. The word referred to a social position within England's class system. A freeman was a person below the rank of a noble, but higher in rank than a serf, and as such, they weren't tied to any particular landlord. Now, most people in Britain at the time were peasants and serfs, and therefore didn't hold the rights afforded to freemen in Magna Carta. Centuries of upheaval eventually changed things, but in the short term, the Great Charter didn't really matter, because as we mentioned earlier, it was a total failure after it was sealed here in Runnymede. The parties walked away from this riverside meadow happy, but only on the surface. Deep down, the barons and the king deeply mistrusted one another, and neither side was truly confident that the peace deal would stand the test of time. Within a couple of months, King John broke the terms of the crucial Clause 61, which stipulated that the barons could overthrow the king should he defy the Great Charter at any time. John wrote to the Pope, who replied declaring that the Magna Carta was an illegal and shameful document, which he said John had been forced to accept, and which defiled the rights of the monarchy and the church. Now, this left the peace deal brokered here at Runnymede rather moot, and so the country quickly broke out into civil war, a 2-year conflict known as the First Barons' War. We'll talk about how the First Barons' War unfolded in a moment, but here in the meadow we find another prominent monument, a trio of large willow sculptures known as the Last Survivors. These are the largest of a number of distinctive sculptures that you may have spotted as we've been walking around Runnymede, made rather impressively of hundreds of twisted willow branches. Now, of course, Runnymede is just a meadow between a river and a hill, but its historical significance attracts thousands of visitors every year, and sculptures and memorials provide useful points to think about the legacy of the events that happened here more than 800 years ago. But if you walk more widely around this area, you'll stumble across even more memorials. The most prominent, just on the edge of the meadow, is a large installation known as Writ in Water, a circular space designed for contemplation at a site of immense importance. But of course, few people were singing Magna Carta's praises back in the second half of 1215, because after King John got the Pope to declare the document illegal, civil war ensued. This time, the barons actively sought to dethrone John and replace him with Louis, the son of the King of France, and they got quite far in their efforts. The barons and Louis's French armies successfully invaded around half of England, and Louis was even declared King of England by the barons in London. But there was no coronation, and the war continued. King John died towards the end of 1216, and he was succeeded by his son, Henry III, who actually won the support of the barons. This inevitably turned the tide against Louis and his French armies, and so the First Barons' War came to an end, perhaps unusually, with a victory for both the barons and the English king, and Magna Carta was finally restored into law in 1217. It was only from this point on that the document came to be known as Magna Carta, the Great Charter, establishing a lasting impact on society that, as we know, endures to this day. Now, if you visit Runnymede in the modern day, there's plenty more than just a meadow to enjoy. Just here, a delightful tea room is housed in one of two historic lodges, the Fairhaven Lodges, which were built back in the early 1930s, one on either side of the Windsor Road, just here. It's at this point that it probably makes sense to tell you how you can visit Runnymede and the site of Magna Carta for yourself. And just like it was back in the early 13th century, it's not all that hard to get here, however you choose to come. As we mentioned earlier, Runnymede is located about 3 miles from both Windsor and Staines, on opposite sides of the Thames. Now, it's an easy drive here from anywhere in the region, There's a fair amount of space for parking, although things can get busy in the summer months. It is pay and display, or free if you're a member of the National Trust. By public transport, this rural meadow is a little trickier to reach. Your best bet is to get the number 8 bus from either Windsor or nearby Egham, and get off at the Bells of Ouseley, a big old carvery on the edge of the village of Old Windsor. And from there, it's just a short walk here. But if you're really looking to make a day of it, then the most scenic way to get to Runnymede is by boat. During the summer, river cruises along the Thames depart from Windsor and Hampton Court Palace, both of which pass by a wealth of gorgeous scenery and plenty more places of interest too. Here at the Runnymede Boathouse is where you'll embark or disembark your river cruise. And of course the River Thames was for a long time one of the principal highways that was used by kings, barons and more when travelling in and out of London. Now, we can't say for certain whether King John and the barons came to Runnymede by boat back in June of 1215, but through the centuries the Thames was a crucial waterway in the heart of England. Much of the trade which passed in and out of the country made its way along this river, and the now tranquil riverside scene at Windsor was once filled to the brim with boats of all shapes and sizes, carrying people and goods to and fro. Now, of course, there are a few rivers in Britain which have more history along their banks than the Thames here. It's the second longest river in England, passing not only through the megacity of London, but also plenty of gorgeous countryside, just as we see here. And as we know, the river, along with Cooper's Hill on the other side, was part of the reason why people held meetings here at Runnymede for so long. Runnymede's name is even said to derive from the Old English Runnymede, literally meaning a meadow for regular meetings, showcasing once again just how important this picturesque piece of England has been for so long. And with gorgeous riverside views, a wealth of fetching sculptures, memorials and artworks, and of course rich heritage, Runnymede really is a fascinating place to visit if you get the chance. But sadly, it's here that we've reached the end of our walk around the place where Magna Carta was sealed more than 8 centuries ago. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're looking forward to visiting Runnymede for yourself sometime soon.